A bunch of black men in bargain bin suits think they belong inside a federal courthouse? Captain Randall Voss sneered as he strode forward, violently knocking the sealed federal folder from Adrian Cole's hand. The documents scattered across the rain-soaked pavement, while nearby officers burst into laughter. Officer Dean Mercer grabbed Adrian by the collar and slammed the black man against the hood of a patrol cruiser. "Every time," Mercer mocked. "A black guy carries one official-looking folder and suddenly thinks he's running the government." Marcus Cole stepped forward. "Take your hands off my brother." Voss smirked. "Or what? You three going to sue us with imaginary lawyers?" Mercer crouched, picked up Adrian's worn brass memorial pin, glanced at it with disgust, then flicked it into a muddy puddle. "This old piece of junk?" Mercer laughed. "Looks like the only family legacy you people ever inherited was bad luck." The officers laughed even louder. Voss folded his arms and looked the three brothers up and down. "Look around. This courthouse is where respectable people come for justice. You three look like you're here to beg for mercy." Elijah bent to retrieve the pin, but Mercer kicked it farther away before snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. "You aren't walking into that courtroom," Voss said coldly. "You'll leave in the back of a police car exactly where people like you belong." Adrian slowly lifted his eyes and met Voss's stare. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career." At that exact moment, every police radio screamed with an urgent statewide broadcast. Stay with this story until the very end, because what happens next will change every life standing on these courthouse steps. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. And if stories about courage, justice, and unexpected truth inspire you, subscribe so you won't miss the powerful ending. 5 hours before the handcuffs clicked shut outside the federal courthouse, the city of Ashford was just beginning to wake beneath a gray September sky. Inside a modest brick house in Riverside, Adrian Cole stood alone in front of an old cedar closet that still carried the scent of cedar oil and machine grease. He slowly reached for a weathered brown coat hanging on a wooden hanger. The fabric was faded, the elbows worn smooth after decades of use. Yet Adrian handled it as though it were the most valuable possession he owned. "It still smells like him," Marcus said quietly as he entered the room. Adrian nodded without turning. "It always will." The coat had belonged to their father, Isaiah Cole. For 32 years, Isaiah had worked as a maintenance technician at the Daniel H. Carter Federal Courthouse. Every hallway, every courtroom, every staircase carried memories of his quiet footsteps. Judges respected him. Clerks greeted him by name. Lawyers often joked that Isaiah knew the building better than anyone else. Yet outside those walls, respect had not always followed him. When Adrian was 16, he watched his father return home with bruises hidden beneath his work shirt, after being detained by local officers who insisted a black maintenance worker carrying courthouse keys looked suspicious. Isaiah never filed a complaint. He simply sat at the kitchen table, cleaned the blood from his lip, and told his sons words they never forgot. "Never let another man's hatred decide the kind of man you become." That sentence became the foundation of 3 remarkable lives. Adrian chose law enforcement not to wield power, but to reform it. Marcus chose military service not because he loved war, but because discipline could protect people from chaos. Elijah entered public service because he believed laws meant little if good people refused to enforce them fairly. The 3 brothers had walked different roads, yet every step traced back to the same kitchen table and the same quiet man wearing the old brown coat. Marcus glanced toward the window. "Our security teams are still waiting for orders." "They'll keep waiting," Adrian replied. Marcus smiled knowingly. "You still think today should be done without escorts?" "It has to be." The front door opened, and Elijah stepped inside carrying 3 cups of coffee from the neighborhood diner where Isaiah had eaten breakfast every Friday for nearly 20 years. "I figured Dad would have yelled at us if we skipped breakfast today." The brothers laughed softly. For a brief moment, they were no longer some of the most powerful public servants in the state. They were simply 3 sons missing their father. Elijah handed Adrian a small velvet box. "I found this in Mom's dresser." Adrian opened it. Inside rested an old brass memorial pin engraved with Isaiah Cole's initials. Their mother had once said Isaiah wore it every day because it reminded him that dignity could never be taken unless a person surrendered it willingly. Adrian carefully fastened the pin onto the faded coat. Marcus studied him. "You know, wearing that coat is going to attract attention." "I hope it does." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You think they'll judge you before they know who you are?" "I don't think," Adrian answered. "I know." Silence settled over the room. They all understood why today's plan mattered. The federal hearing scheduled that morning would examine years of allegations involving misconduct inside the Ashford Police Department. Anonymous complaints, missing body camera footage, altered arrest reports, and accusations of racial profiling had finally reached federal investigators. Captain Randall Voss was expected to testify. What almost nobody knew was that the hearing also served another purpose. Governor Elijah Cole had quietly authorized an integrity assessment of the officers assigned to courthouse security. No press announcement, no ceremonial arrival, no flashing lights. Only 3 black brothers arriving exactly as ordinary citizens would. If we show up with state troopers and armored SUVs, Elijah said, everyone suddenly remembers the Constitution. Marcus folded his arms. But when they think they're dealing with regular people, they reveal who they really are. Adrian finished. A phone vibrated across the kitchen counter. Marcus glanced at the screen. His military aide. He declined the call. They're asking where I am. They'll know soon enough, Adrian said. The brothers climbed into an aging dark blue sedan that had once belonged to Isaiah. The engine rumbled to life after the second turn of the key. Marcus chuckled. Dad would have refused to replace this car. He always said, Elijah smiled, if it still gets you where honesty needs to go, it's good enough. As they drove through Riverside, familiar streets rolled past the windows. The church where Isaiah volunteered every Christmas. The basketball court where Marcus learned leadership long before earning military rank. The library where Elijah first dreamed of changing laws instead of complaining about them. Then the sedan slowed beside a quiet intersection. A small bronze plaque stood near the sidewalk. Isaiah Cole had been handcuffed there 23 years earlier after being falsely accused of stealing courthouse equipment he had actually been assigned to repair. The charges were eventually dropped. No officer apologized. No report was corrected. Adrian looked through the windshield. Today's never been about revenge. Marcus nodded. It's about making sure nobody else's father goes through that. None of them noticed the unmarked police SUV parked across the street. Inside, Captain Randall Voss studied 3 surveillance photographs resting on the passenger seat. One of his officers spoke over the radio. Captain, the 3 men matching the Cole file just left Riverside. Voss stared at Adrian's picture. So they finally decided to show up. He smiled, a slow, confident smile. Good. He picked up the radio. When they reached the courthouse, his voice turned cold. Don't let them walk through those doors until I say so. The trap had already begun to close. By the time the old blue sedan rolled into the parking area of the Daniel H. Carter Federal Courthouse, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle. Reporters gathered near the front steps, attorneys hurried through security, and federal employees moved with practiced urgency toward the building. Adrian parked several rows away from the reserved government vehicles. Marcus glanced toward the nearly empty VIP parking section. We still have time to move closer. Adrian shook his head. Today we're walking in like everyone else. Elijah smiled faintly, and we'll be treated like everyone else. The 3 brothers stepped from the sedan carrying nothing more than a worn leather briefcase, a small garment bag, and the sealed federal folder Mercer would later throw onto the pavement. None of them wore badges. None displayed rank. None asked for special treatment. As they approached the main security entrance, Captain Randall Voss was already waiting beneath the courthouse canopy. His eyes immediately settled on Adrian's faded brown coat. There they are, he muttered. Officer Dean Mercer followed his gaze. The maintenance crew entrance is around back. Several officers chuckled. The brothers continued walking without responding. A young family standing nearby moved aside to let them pass, but Voss deliberately stepped into their path. Hold it. The line behind them stopped. Voss slowly looked each brother up and down before his gaze returned to Adrian's coat. I've seen that look before, he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. 3 black men dressed like they're going to a funeral, carrying mystery folders into a federal courthouse. He smirked. Usually that's the beginning of my paperwork. A few people in line exchanged uncomfortable glances. Adrian remained calm. We're here for an official proceeding. So is every criminal after an arrest, Mercer replied. He reached for the sealed folder. Adrian held on to it. It contains protected federal documents. Mercer's smile widened. Then you won't mind letting me see what's inside. Without waiting for permission, Mercer ripped the folder from Adrian's hands. The heavy envelope struck the wet concrete. Official documents slid across the pavement. One sheet stopped inches from a television cameraman. The federal seal was clearly visible. Marcus immediately stepped forward. Careful. Mercer shoved him backward. No. Marcus regained his balance but made no attempt to retaliate. Several people watching expected the larger brother to react. Instead, he slowly straightened his jacket. Voss laughed. Smart choice. He leaned closer. I've been hoping one of you would give us an excuse. Elijah crouched to collect the scattered papers before rain soaked them completely. As he reached for one document, Mercer deliberately stepped on it with his polished boot. You missed one. Elijah looked up. Please move your foot. Mercer looked around at the growing crowd. Listen to that. He laughed. He actually thinks saying, please, changes who he is. More officers joined the laughter. Adrian quietly gathered the remaining papers without saying another word. Voss circled them slowly like a man inspecting suspects. What exactly brings the three of you here? We have business inside the courthouse, Adrian answered. Everybody says that. Voss extended his hand. Identification. Adrian handed over his driver's license. Voss glanced at the name. Adrian Cole. He then examined Marcus's license. Marcus Cole. Finally, Elijah's. Elijah Cole. Three brothers. The surname triggered a faint memory. Voss knew he had seen it somewhere before. He simply couldn't remember where. You boys related? Marcus answered evenly. We are. Voss handed the licenses back. I figured. Mercer pointed toward Adrian's weathered coat. That's a nice costume. His fingers landed on the old brass memorial pin fastened above Adrian's heart. He twisted it loose. The metal snapped from the fabric. What are you doing? Elijah asked. Mercer held the pin between two fingers. This little trinket? He examined it with exaggerated curiosity. Looks like something from a flea market. It belonged to our father, Adrian said quietly. Mercer shrugged. Then he obviously had terrible taste. He flicked the pin into a muddy puddle beside the curb. The small piece of brass disappeared beneath dirty rainwater. Elijah instinctively stepped toward it. Mercer blocked him. No. Behind the crowd, an elderly courthouse custodian named Ruth Daniels froze. She recognized the pin instantly. Years earlier, she had seen Isaiah Cole wearing that exact pin every morning while unlocking courthouse maintenance rooms. Her expression slowly changed from surprise to concern. She whispered to herself, Isaiah's boys. Back at the security line, Adrian stared silently at the puddle. For the first time that morning, disappointment, not anger, crossed his face. Voss noticed. What's wrong? He smiled coldly. Did I hurt your feelings? Adrian slowly lifted his eyes. No. You've reminded me exactly why we're here. Voss misunderstood the answer completely. He turned toward his officers. Search every bag. Mercer immediately grabbed Marcus's garment bag. Another officer snatched Elijah's phone before he could unlock it. We're checking everything. Marcus spoke firmly. You have no legal basis to seize our personal property. Voss stepped within inches of his face. I don't need permission from three strangers who think a courthouse revolves around them. As Mercer unzipped Adrian's briefcase, his smile suddenly disappeared. Inside rested the thick, sealed federal investigation file. The gold lettering across the cover caught his attention. His eyes widened. Captain, Mercer whispered, you need to see this. Mercer's grin slowly disappeared as he stared at the thick folder inside Adrian's briefcase. Embossed across the cover in gold letters were the words, Federal Investigative Material, Authorized Access Only. His heartbeat quickened. For a split second, uncertainty crossed his face. Captain, he said again, holding up the folder. Randall Voss snatched it from his hands and flipped through the first few pages. Several names had been blacked out. Multiple pages carried federal court seals. A few photographs were paper-clipped together. Voss couldn't read enough to understand the investigation, but one thing became immediately clear. These documents were genuine. His eyes narrowed. Instead of becoming cautious, he made a decision that would destroy his career. He slammed the folder shut. They stole it. Mercer blinked. What? You heard me. Voss raised his voice so everyone nearby could hear. These three men are in possession of stolen federal investigative material. The crowd immediately erupted into whispers. Elijah looked directly at him. You know that's not true. Voss smiled. The good thing about being the officer in charge is that my report gets written first. Marcus took one slow step forward. Captain, you're making a serious mistake. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. Voss pointed toward the brothers. Cuff them. Four officers hesitated. One younger deputy quietly asked, Captain, shouldn't we call courthouse security first? Voss shot him a cold stare. He gave an order. No one spoke again. Mercer pulled Adrian's arms behind his back. Cold steel snapped around his wrists. The sharp metallic click echoed across the courthouse entrance. Several people in the crowd instinctively reached for their phones. Voss noticed. Anyone recording this scene, he shouted, step back behind the barricades. A television cameraman continued filming anyway. Mercer walked toward him. Camera down. "We're on public property," the cameraman answered. Mercer placed one hand over the lens. "You are now interfering with a police investigation." Meanwhile, another officer forced Marcus against the patrol vehicle. His cheek struck the rain-covered hood with a dull thud. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief second, but never resisted. "Face down!" "I am complying." "I said face down." The officer shoved him harder. Across the sidewalk, Elijah watched silently as another deputy twisted his arms behind his back. The handcuffs locked tightly around his wrists. "You don't have to do this," Elijah said calmly. "No," Voss replied. "I want to." He leaned closer. "You three walked into the wrong courthouse today." Adrian slowly looked around the growing crowd. Some people watched with fear. Others looked away. A few quietly shook their heads but said nothing. The silence reminded him of stories his father used to tell. People often witnessed injustice. Very few interrupted it. Mercer searched Adrian's coat pockets. Finding nothing, he reached the old brown coat itself. "This thing belongs in a trash can." He grabbed the front of the coat and jerked it violently. The loose stitching around the brass pin tore completely. The fabric ripped with a sharp sound. A murmur spread through the crowd. Adrian looked down at the damaged coat. His expression never changed. "It was my father's." Mercer shrugged. "Now it's garbage." Without another word, he threw the torn coat onto the wet pavement. Rainwater soaked through the worn fabric almost instantly. Across the plaza, Ruth Daniels gasped. She remembered Isaiah wearing that very coat every winter while repairing broken courthouse boilers. She whispered under her breath, "I'm so sorry, Isaiah." Before she could step forward, another voice echoed from the courthouse entrance. "Captain Voss." Everyone turned. Claire Benson, the federal courtroom administrator, hurried down the courthouse steps carrying a clipboard. "What is happening?" Voss answered before anyone else could speak. "Routine arrest." Claire frowned. "No." She checked her paperwork. "I'm looking for 3 individuals scheduled to attend this morning's federal hearing." She glanced toward Adrian, then Marcus, then Elijah. "They're supposed to be—" Voss interrupted her immediately. "Those men attempted to enter the courthouse using stolen federal documents." Claire's expression changed. "I don't believe that's correct. They're under investigation. I have confirmed appointments. They're canceled." Claire looked down at her tablet. "No, they aren't." Voss took one step toward her. "They are now." For a brief moment, the two locked eyes. Claire had worked in federal courts for nearly 18 years. She knew intimidation when she saw it. She also knew something was terribly wrong. Quietly, without attracting attention, she stepped backward and slipped her phone into her coat pocket. Instead of arguing further, she pressed a hidden emergency contact button that directly notified the Chief Judge's administrative office. The message was only 4 words. "Witnesses have been detained." Voss never noticed. His attention had shifted elsewhere. Officer Mercer held up Adrian's identification once more. "Captain." "What? Should we verify these names with federal security?" Voss's jaw tightened. "No. But protocol says—" "I don't care what protocol says." His voice grew colder. "Write exactly what I tell you." Mercer removed a blank incident report from his patrol bag. Voss began dictating without hesitation. 3 suspects attempted unauthorized access to restricted federal property. He glanced toward Adrian. When officers intervened, his eyes hardened. The suspects became aggressive. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "That's a lie." Voss smiled without the slightest trace of shame. "It will become the truth." Not far away, Sergeant Paul Kessler had remained silent throughout the entire confrontation. But now, as he watched Mercer writing statements that never happened, something inside him shifted. His gaze moved from the false report to the disabled body cameras, to Adrian standing in handcuffs despite never raising his voice. For the first time in months, Kessler seriously questioned whether following Captain Voss's orders had made him part of something far worse than simple police misconduct. He quietly rested one hand on the small backup recording device hidden inside his vest. Then, without anyone noticing, he pressed record. The elevator doors slid open with a metallic groan. 2 deputies escorted the 3 brothers through a dim concrete corridor beneath the Daniel H. Carter Federal Courthouse. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the damp floor. Unlike the polished marble halls above, this level smelled of rust, bleach, and stale air. Captain Randall Voss walked several steps behind them, his confidence growing with every passing minute. "This is where people stop pretending they're important," he said. Marcus glanced around the holding area. 3 empty detention cells, 2 security cameras. Neither camera displayed a blinking recording light. "They're disconnected," Marcus observed quietly. Vosh smirked. Sharp eyes. He folded his arms. Unfortunately, nobody upstairs will know what happens down here. Mercer unlocked the largest holding cell. Inside, the brothers entered without resistance. The heavy steel door slammed shut, followed by the unmistakable sound of the electronic lock engaging. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Then Voss pulled a stack of paperwork from a brown envelope. You still have one chance. He slid 3 forms through the narrow slot beneath the bars. Sign these. Adrian picked up the first page. Across the top were the words, voluntary statement. Below, someone had already typed a confession claiming the brothers had refused lawful orders, attempted to enter a restricted federal facility using stolen investigative files, and physically threatened courthouse officers. Marcus let out a slow breath. You prepared this before questioning us. Voss smiled. I believe in efficiency. Elijah looked up. So your investigation is already finished. It is once you sign. Adrian calmly folded the papers and handed them back through the slot. No. Voss's expression hardened. You don't understand. He stepped closer to the bars. The federal hearing upstairs doesn't begin without its witnesses. Adrian met his eyes. And if you're sitting down here long enough, Voss smiled, everyone will assume you never intended to testify. Marcus finally spoke. You're trying to erase us from today's hearing. I'm trying to protect my officers. By committing another crime? Voss ignored the question. Instead, he paced slowly in front of the cell. You know what people believe? He looked directly at Adrian. They believe officers. His voice became colder. They don't believe 3 angry black brothers with a story. None of the brothers answered. Their silence irritated him far more than an argument would have. Voss suddenly stopped walking. I read about your father. The room grew still. He wasn't the saint people pretend he was. Marcus took one deliberate step toward the bars. Don't. Voss continued anyway. Isaiah Cole should have stayed in his place instead of sticking his nose into police business. Elijah's jaw tightened. Our father spent his life serving this courthouse. He spent his life pretending maintenance workers deserved respect. The words echoed through the holding area. For the first time that morning, anger flashed across Marcus's face. But before he could respond, Adrian quietly placed one hand on his brother's arm. Marcus immediately stepped back. Voss noticed. There it is. He pointed at Marcus. I almost had you. He turned toward Mercer. See? One more push and we'd have assaulting an officer too. Mercer chuckled. They're smarter than they look. Voss leaned against the bars. You know what your father taught you? He answered his own question. To lose quietly. Adrian's voice remained calm. No. He taught us something you never learned. Voss waited. Character survives even when power doesn't. For the first time, Voss's smile disappeared completely. Without another word, he walked toward the security desk outside the holding area. Mercer followed. What now? Voss lowered his voice. Check every body camera. They're already off. I know. I want every file from this morning deleted. Mercer's eyes widened slightly. Captain, federal property uses automatic backups. Then erase what you can. And if somebody asks? Voss looked at him without blinking. Tell them the system malfunctioned. A few feet away, Sergeant Paul Kessler stood silently beside the equipment lockers. Neither Voss nor Mercer noticed the tiny digital recorder still hidden beneath Kessler's tactical vest. Every word had been captured. Kessler lowered his head, pretending to organize paperwork while quietly saving the audio file onto an encrypted backup card he always carried in his vest. Months earlier, he had started making copies of conversations after noticing reports being altered. He had never imagined the evidence would become this serious. Meanwhile, above ground, the grand federal courtroom was filling with attorneys, investigators, and reporters. Chief Judge Margaret Holloway glanced toward the entrance. They're late. Her courtroom administrator, Claire Benson, stepped beside her. They never arrived. They've never missed an appearance. Claire hesitated. I think something has happened. The judge frowned. What do you mean? Claire discreetly handed over her phone. On the screen was the emergency message she had sent only minutes earlier. Witnesses have been detained. Judge Holloway read it twice. Her expression changed instantly. Who authorized this? We don't know. The judge immediately turned toward a U.S. Marshal. Find Captain Randall Voss. Yes, Your Honor. And locate the 3 Cole brothers. Before the marshal could leave, another court officer hurried into the courtroom. Judge. What is it? The governor's office has been calling for the past 10 minutes. The judge looked puzzled. They're asking whether Governor Cole has arrived. Claire froze. So have State Public Safety Headquarters. They're asking for Commissioner Adrian Cole. Another clerk rushed in. And National Guard Command can't locate Lieutenant General Marcus Cole. The room fell silent. Judge Holloway slowly looked back toward the holding cells shown on the courthouse security map. A terrible realization settled over her. 3 of the most important officials in the state had vanished. Inside her courthouse. While Captain Randall Voss congratulated himself for delaying the federal hearing, another story was quietly unfolding in the forgotten corners of the courthouse. Ruth Daniels pushed her janitor's cart through an empty service hallway, her hands trembling. She had worked inside the Daniel H. Carter Federal Courthouse for 38 years. She had polished its marble floors. She had dusted judges' chambers. She had watched thousands of people walk through its doors. And 23 years earlier, she had watched Isaiah Cole walk out in handcuffs. She stopped outside an old maintenance storage room rarely used anymore. From beneath a loose floor panel, Ruth carefully lifted a weathered metal box wrapped in plastic. "I prayed I'd never have to open you again," she whispered. Inside lay a cassette recorder, several faded photographs, and a sealed envelope marked in Isaiah's handwriting. "If you're reading this, the truth finally matters." Ruth closed her eyes. The memory came rushing back. That night, Isaiah had been repairing electrical wiring near the courthouse archives when he accidentally overheard 2 officers arguing. One of them was a young Randall Voss. The other officer wanted to destroy evidence connected to an unlawful arrest. Isaiah refused to unlock the archive room after realizing what they intended to do. "You'll have to answer for this someday," Isaiah had warned. Instead, he became the one accused. By sunrise, he was in handcuffs. Within weeks, the department claimed the incident had been a misunderstanding. The case disappeared, but Ruth had secretly copied one piece of evidence before anyone could destroy it. She placed the old cassette into a portable digital converter she carried in her cleaning cart. A soft, crackling voice filled the hallway. "I'm not helping you destroy government records." Isaiah. Then another voice, younger, sharper. "If you don't cooperate, nobody's going to believe a maintenance worker over a police officer." Randall Voss. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "He never forgot your voice," she whispered. Without wasting another second, she hurried toward Claire Benson's office. Meanwhile, beneath the courthouse, Sergeant Paul Kessler stood alone beside the disabled security monitors. Captain Voss had left moments earlier to coordinate the next stage of his plan. Mercer remained upstairs, supervising the courthouse entrance. Kessler looked around carefully before removing a tiny encrypted memory card from inside his vest. For 8 months, he had quietly copied body camera footage after noticing reports that never matched what cameras actually recorded. At first, he believed they were isolated mistakes. Then the mistakes became routine. Missing videos, edited timestamps, reports rewritten after arrests. Every complaint somehow disappeared. Today's arrest had erased the last of his doubt. He inserted the memory card into a secure courthouse maintenance terminal. The upload bar slowly appeared, sending backup to federal evidence server. 5%, 9%, 14%. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Kessler immediately removed the card and closed the terminal. Mercer rounded the corner. "What are you doing?" "Inventory." Mercer looked unconvinced. "The captain wants every recording system checked." "I already did." "No problems?" Kessler answered carefully. "Nothing unusual." Mercer nodded. "Good." As soon as Mercer disappeared, Kessler quietly exhaled. The upload had continued automatically in the background. Upstairs, Claire Benson listened to the restored audio recording inside her office. Judge Margaret Holloway stood beside her. Neither woman spoke until the tape ended. The judge slowly removed her glasses. "That voice?" Claire nodded. "It's Captain Voss." Judge Holloway stared at the rain outside her office window. 23 years. He thought the evidence was gone. Claire handed over Isaiah's handwritten envelope. Inside was only one sentence. "The truth doesn't disappear just because powerful people hide it." The judge folded the note carefully. "We're reopening Isaiah Cole's case." A deputy marshal knocked urgently. "Your Honor." "Yes?" "We still can't locate Commissioner Adrian Cole." "What about General Marcus Cole?" "No contact." "And Governor Cole?" The marshal swallowed. "The governor's security detail reports his state vehicle was never used this morning." Judge Holloway looked directly at Claire. "They came here privately." Claire nodded. "Exactly as ordinary citizens." The realization made the silence even heavier. Downstairs, inside the holding cell, Marcus noticed the faint rumble of heavy diesel engines somewhere beyond the courthouse walls. He smiled slightly. Elijah looked toward him. "You hear it?" Marcus nodded. "My people. You think they've found us?" "Not yet, but they're getting closer." Captain Voss returned, carrying a cardboard evidence box. He placed it on the table outside the cell. Inside lay Adrian's torn coat, Elijah's broken phone, Marcus's garment bag, and Isaiah's brass memorial pin, still covered in dried mud. Voss picked up the pin between two fingers. So much trouble. He looked at Adrian, over one worthless piece of metal. Adrian answered quietly, "It isn't metal." Voss laughed. "Then what is it?" "A promise." Voss rolled his eyes. "No." He dropped the pin onto the concrete floor. It was. With deliberate cruelty, he crushed it beneath the heel of his boot. The sharp metallic snap echoed through the holding area. Marcus instinctively clenched both fists. Elijah looked away. For the first time that day, pain showed on Adrian's face. Not because the pin had broken, but because it had belonged to the man who taught them never to surrender their dignity. Voss mistook the silence for defeat. He smiled triumphantly. "You finally understand." Adrian slowly raised his head. "No, Captain." His voice remained calm. "We've simply learned exactly how far you're willing to go." At that same moment, unnoticed by anyone in the holding area, Kessler's hidden upload reached completion. A small message flashed across the secure federal server. Evidence successfully received. Someone, somewhere above Captain Voss's authority, now possessed every recording he believed had been erased. The confirmation on the federal evidence server arrived less than 30 seconds after Sergeant Paul Kessler's upload finished. He never saw it, but someone else did. Inside a secure operations center nearly 50 miles away, a federal evidence analyst frowned as a priority notification flashed across her monitor. Emergency upload. Ashford Federal Courthouse. The attached files carried automatic metadata. Body camera disabled. Officer misconduct suspected. Restricted evidence. She immediately picked up the phone. Notify the Chief Judge's emergency security detail. Down in the holding area, Captain Randall Voss had already decided he could no longer risk leaving the three brothers inside the courthouse. He walked toward Mercer with a determined expression. "We're moving them." Mercer glanced around. "Where?" "Municipal Holding Facility 4. Mercer hesitated. "Captain, that's outside federal jurisdiction." "Exactly. What reason do we give?" Voss smiled. "Officer safety." Marcus heard every word through the bars. He exchanged a brief glance with Adrian. Adrian barely shook his head. "Not yet." Marcus understood immediately. If they revealed their identities now, they would stop Voss, but they might never expose how deeply the corruption reached. Elijah quietly exhaled. Every passing minute carried enormous political consequences. The governor of Franklin had disappeared on the morning of one of the state's most important federal hearings. Within another hour, news channels across the state would begin asking questions. Still, he said nothing. Mercer unlocked the holding cell. "Stand up." The brothers complied. As Mercer searched Adrian one final time, his hand brushed against something inside the inner pocket of the damaged brown coat. A card? He pulled out a black security credential. Unlike an ordinary government badge, it displayed no photograph on the front, only a gold state seal, a serial number, and a security clearance stripe unlike anything Mercer had ever seen. He frowned. "I've never seen one like this." Voss took the card. His confidence faltered for the first time all morning. He turned it over. Nothing. No title. No department. No name beyond. Cole. Mercer lowered his voice. "Should we verify it?" Voss stared at the card for several seconds. Every instinct told him something was wrong, but pride spoke louder. "It's fake." "You sure?" "If it were real." He forced a laugh. "Do you honestly think someone important would drive a 20-year-old sedan?" Mercer nodded slowly. "Probably not." Without another word, Voss snapped the credential in half. The plastic cracked cleanly across the middle. He tossed both pieces into a nearby trash container. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief second. Not because of the damaged credential, because Voss had just destroyed state property carrying the highest level of administrative access. Another felony, another charge, another decision from which there would be no return. Several floors above them, Ruth Daniels and Claire Benson hurried through a service corridor toward the Chief Judge's private conference room. Claire carried Isaiah Cole's restored audio recording. Ruth held the broken brass memorial pin wrapped carefully inside a clean white handkerchief. Judge Margaret Holloway looked up as they entered. "Did you find something?" Claire didn't answer. She simply pressed play. Isaiah's calm voice filled the room. "I'm not helping anyone destroy government records." Then Randall Voss's younger voice answered, "If you refuse, nobody will believe a maintenance worker over a police officer." Silence followed. Judge Holloway slowly looked toward Ruth. "You've carried this all these years?" Ruth nodded. "I promised Isaiah that if the truth ever had a chance." Her voice trembled. "I'd make sure it wasn't buried again." The judge stood immediately. "Call the United States Marshals. They're already searching." No. Judge Holloway's expression hardened. I want every exit locked. If Captain Voss is moving those witnesses, she looked directly at Claire. He's committing obstruction inside a federal courthouse. Back downstairs, Voss's patience had evaporated. Move. Mercer pushed Adrian toward a side hallway rarely used by courthouse staff. Unlike the public elevators, this corridor led to an underground vehicle entrance connected to city streets. No reporters, no cameras, no public witnesses. Exactly what Voss wanted. As they walked, Kessler quietly fell several steps behind. His heart pounded. He knew where this tunnel ended. Outside waited two unmarked transport vans. Neither vehicle belonged to the federal courthouse. Both belonged to the Ashford Police Department. Once those vans crossed city limits, federal authority would become far more complicated. Kessler reached into his vest. His thumb rested on the emergency transmission button connected to the courthouse's internal security network. If he pressed it, his career would almost certainly end. If he didn't, 3 innocent men, including the governor, would disappear into a corrupt system Voss controlled. He thought about every report he had signed without asking questions, every complaint he had ignored, every citizen who had walked away believing no honest officer remained. Then he remembered Adrian's words inside the holding cell. Character survives even when power doesn't. Kessler stopped walking. He pressed the button. A silent emergency signal left his radio. No alarm sounded. No flashing lights appeared. Only one encrypted message reached courthouse security. Unauthorized prisoner transfer in progress. Lower service tunnel. Halfway down the tunnel, Voss suddenly stopped. He looked over his shoulder. Did anyone else hear that? Mercer listened. Nothing. Only the distant hum of ventilation fans. Probably maintenance. Voss wasn't convinced. He looked at Adrian. You've been awfully calm. Adrian answered evenly. Because angry people make mistakes. Voss smiled coldly. And calm people? They recognized them. For just a moment, Voss felt something unfamiliar. Unease. Not fear. Not yet. But the certainty he had carried all morning had begun to crack. He looked at the 3 brothers. None begged. None argued. None threatened lawsuits. None demanded special treatment. They simply watched him. Almost. As though they already knew how this day would end. Voss shook away the thought. Keep moving. They continued toward the underground loading bay. Above them, Judge Holloway stepped into the courthouse command center beside federal marshals. A security technician pointed toward a surveillance monitor. Your Honor, what is it? The lower service cameras just came back online. The screen flickered, then stabilized. 3 handcuffed men. Captain Randall Voss, Officer Dean Mercer, Sergeant Paul Kessler, all walking toward the transport bay. Judge Holloway's face turned pale. They're trying to remove them. She looked at the lead marshal. Seal every exit. The marshal grabbed his radio. All federal units. His voice echoed across the courthouse. Lock down the building immediately. At that exact moment, the heavy steel doors at the far end of the underground tunnel began sliding open. Bright daylight poured inside. Beyond them waited 2 black transport vans. And a future Captain Randall Voss still believed he controlled. The massive steel doors of the underground loading bay rolled open with a deep mechanical rumble. Cold daylight spilled across the concrete floor. Captain Randall Voss smiled. There they are. 2 black transport vans waited outside with their engines running. Ashford police officers stood beside the vehicles, believing they were about to receive 3 dangerous suspects from the federal courthouse. Load them up, Voss ordered. Mercer stepped forward and reached for Adrian's arm. Before he could touch him again, another voice echoed through the tunnel. Nobody moves. Every head turned. 6 deputy U.S. Marshals rushed into the loading bay from the opposite corridor, weapons drawn but pointed safely downward. Behind them came Judge Margaret Holloway, Claire Benson, and several federal security officers. Voss forced a confident smile. Your Honor. Judge Holloway's voice was ice cold. Captain Voss. Why are federally scheduled witnesses being removed from my courthouse? They're under arrest. Under whose authority? They possessed stolen federal documents. Judge Holloway looked toward Adrian. Is that true? Before Adrian could answer, Voss stepped between them. Your Honor, these men are attempting to manipulate this investigation. The judge's eyes narrowed. Step aside. Voss didn't move. I'm responsible for courthouse security. No, Judge Holloway replied. You were responsible. Silence filled the tunnel. Then Sergeant Paul Kessler slowly stepped forward. His hands trembled. Your Honor. Everyone looked at him. I have evidence. Voss spun around. Kessler, you need to stop talking. Kessler ignored him. I recorded everything. Mercer's face turned pale. What? I copied every conversation, every order, every false report. Voss's calm composure finally cracked. You little traitor. I became a police officer to protect people. Kessler looked directly at Judge Holloway, not to help destroy them. He removed the encrypted memory card from his vest and handed it to a deputy marshal. This contains today's body camera recordings. He hesitated. And 8 months of additional evidence. The marshal immediately secured the card inside an evidence pouch. Voss lunged forward. That's department property! 2 marshals instantly blocked his path. Judge Holloway spoke without raising her voice. No, Captain. From this moment, it is federal evidence. Voss turned toward Mercer. Get those prisoners into the vans. Mercer took one uncertain step. No one else moved. Every Ashford officer standing near the vehicles looked from Voss to the deputy marshals, then back again. No one wanted to be the next person following an unlawful order. Judge Holloway nodded toward Adrian. Remove their restraints. One deputy reached for the handcuffs. Voss shouted, Don't unlock them. The deputy ignored him. One click. Adrian's cuffs fell away. Another click. Marcus rubbed his wrists for the first time in hours. Finally, Elijah's restraints dropped to the concrete floor with a metallic clang that echoed through the loading bay. Voss stared in disbelief. You have no idea who these men really are. Judge Holloway answered calmly. Oh, I know exactly who they are. She looked toward Adrian. Commissioner Cole. Every officer in the tunnel froze. Mercer's mouth slowly fell open. What? Judge Holloway continued. As commissioner of the State Bureau of Public Safety, she handed Adrian the recovered federal investigation folder. Your scheduled testimony is now officially recognized by this court. The tunnel became completely silent. Officer after officer looked toward the calm black man they had watched being shoved against a patrol car less than an hour earlier. Mercer's breathing became shallow. Commissioner. He looked toward Voss. You said. Voss interrupted him. He's lying. Judge Holloway didn't respond. Instead, she gestured toward a senior state police commander who had just entered the tunnel. The commander immediately walked straight to Adrian. Without hesitation, he stood at attention, then delivered a perfect salute. Good morning, Commissioner. It took us longer than it should have to find you, sir. Every remaining doubt vanished. Adrian calmly returned the salute. At ease, Colonel. He turned his attention toward the stunned officers of the Ashford Police Department. My name is Adrian Cole. I serve as Commissioner of the State Bureau of Public Safety. His voice remained calm. I came here today as a witness. He slowly looked at the handcuffs lying on the floor. Instead, I became evidence. No one spoke. Adrian took one measured step toward Voss. You arrested 3 citizens without lawful cause. You ordered false reports. You attempted to obstruct a federal proceeding. You instructed officers to destroy evidence. You attempted to remove protected witnesses from federal jurisdiction. Each sentence struck harder than the last. Voss tried one final time. You can't suspend me. Adrian looked directly into his eyes. Captain Randall Voss. His tone never changed. Effective immediately. I am assuming emergency command authority over every state-certified law enforcement officer assigned to this courthouse. He removed a folded document from the restored investigation file. Judge Holloway nodded. The emergency oversight order was signed before sunrise. Adrian unfolded the document. The Ashford Police Department is hereby placed under temporary state supervision pending federal investigation. Several officers instinctively straightened their posture. Onebiwan. Badges that had moments earlier followed Voss's commands now turned toward Adrian. Captain Voss realized something terrifying. The authority he had abused all morning was no longer his. Yet before anyone could move to arrest him, the deep roar of heavy diesel engines echoed outside the loading bay. The ground seemed to vibrate. Marcus slowly lifted his head. A faint smile crossed his face for the first time that day. He recognized that sound instantly. Outside the tunnel, a convoy of olive green military vehicles rolled through the secured entrance. Judge Holloway looked toward the opening. So they're here, Marcus quietly answered. Right on time. The thunderous growl of diesel engines rolled through the underground loading bay. Every officer instinctively turned toward the entrance. 1, 3, 6. Then an entire convoy of olive green National Guard vehicles came into view, stopping with military precision outside the courthouse. Soldiers stepped out in disciplined formation, securing the perimeter without raising a weapon or shouting a single command. Captain Randall Voss stared in disbelief. What is this? Marcus Cole calmly adjusted the sleeves of his rain-soaked jacket. My transportation. The side door of the lead command vehicle opened. A full colonel in dress uniform strode directly toward Marcus. Without hesitation, he came to attention and delivered a crisp salute. "Lieutenant General Marcus Cole, sir. National Guard Task Force is awaiting your orders." Silence crashed over the loading bay. Mercer's face turned white. "The general?" The colonel looked around, noticing the red marks left by the handcuffs on Marcus's wrists. His expression hardened instantly. "Who authorized restraints on General Cole?" No one answered. Marcus slowly returned the salute. "At ease, Colonel Harrison. Secure the courthouse." "Yes, sir." Within seconds, National Guard personnel coordinated with Deputy U.S. Marshals to establish a protective perimeter. They neither confronted nor threatened the local officers. Their discipline alone was enough to shift the balance of authority. Voss took an uneasy step backward. "This is ridiculous. You can't bring the military into a police investigation." Marcus looked directly at him. "I didn't. The governor authorized emergency coordination." Before Voss could respond, another convoy entered the courthouse plaza. This one was different. Black state vehicles, executive protection agents. The state flag fluttered above the lead limousine. Claire Benson looked toward Judge Holloway. "He's here." The judge nodded. "No, he never left." The rear door of the limousine opened. Executive agents quickly formed a respectful corridor, not because danger was expected, but because protocol demanded it. Every eye followed the man walking calmly through the line of vehicles, still wearing the plain gray suit from that morning, still carrying traces of dried mud on one sleeve, still without any outward symbol of power. "Elijah Cole." Captain Voss frowned. "What's he doing?" Judge Holloway answered quietly. "Watch." As Elijah approached, every executive protection agent stopped simultaneously. Then, in perfect unison, they saluted. "Good afternoon, Governor." The words echoed across the loading bay like thunder. Several Ashford officers gasped. Mercer stumbled backward until he nearly hit the transport van. "No." Voss stared at Elijah as though seeing him for the first time. "Governor." Elijah stopped only a few feet away. "You asked me this morning if I planned to pretend I was someone important." His voice remained calm. "I never pretended to be anyone. You simply decided who I was before asking my name." The sentence landed harder than any accusation. Voss opened his mouth, but no words came. Judge Holloway addressed everyone present. "Let the record reflect that Governor Elijah Cole, Commissioner Adrian Cole, and Lieutenant General Marcus Cole were unlawfully detained while attempting to attend an official federal proceeding." A court reporter recorded every word. Adrian stepped beside the judge and opened the restored investigative file. "Captain Randall Voss." He removed several photographs. "These are arrest reports altered under your command." Another document. "These are body camera recordings intentionally disabled." Another. "These are internal complaints never investigated." Finally, Claire Benson placed the digitized recording from Isaiah Cole onto the courtroom evidence system connected to speakers throughout the loading bay. The familiar voices filled the air. Isaiah Cole, young Randall Voss, the attempted destruction of government records, the threat, the cover-up. When the recording ended, no one spoke. Ruth Daniels slowly walked forward, carrying the broken brass memorial pin wrapped inside her white handkerchief. She stopped before Adrian. "I couldn't save it." Adrian gently accepted the broken pieces. "You already did." He looked toward Voss. "My father lost his reputation because he refused to help destroy evidence." Ruth turned toward the gathered officers. "I watched Isaiah leave this courthouse in handcuffs." Tears filled her eyes. Today, she looked at the three brothers. "I watched his sons walk out with the truth." Captain Voss tried one final time. "I was protecting my officers." Adrian shook his head. No, you were protecting yourself. You lied. You fabricated reports. You obstructed justice. You attempted to destroy evidence. You abused your authority." He paused. "And you believed no one would ever challenge you." Judge Holloway removed a signed federal warrant from the investigation file. "Captain Randall Voss." She looked directly into his eyes. "You are under federal arrest for obstruction of justice, violation of civil rights under color of law, evidence tampering, conspiracy to falsify official records, and unlawful detention of protected witnesses." Deputy U.S. Marshals stepped forward. For the first time all day, Voss did not resist. Mercer lowered his head. "I was following orders," Marcus answered quietly. So were thousands of good officers. They still knew where to stop. A marshal secured handcuffs around Voss's wrists. The metallic click echoed through the same loading bay where Adrian, Marcus, and Elijah had stood in chains only hours earlier. Voss looked toward Elijah. "I've lost everything." Elijah's expression showed neither satisfaction nor hatred. "You lost it the moment you believed the badge placed you above the law." As the marshals led Voss away, every officer in the Ashford Police Department watched in silence. Not because a captain had fallen, but because they had witnessed something far greater. 3 black brothers had entered the courthouse as ordinary citizens. One had taken command of the police. One had commanded the military. One governed the entire state. Yet none of those titles had been the greatest revelation of the day. The greatest revelation was that true authority never needed to announce itself. It revealed itself through integrity. And now, with the truth finally exposed, only one chapter remained. Justice would no longer be promised. It would be carried out. 6 months later, the courtroom where Isaiah Cole had once been falsely accused was filled again. This time, no one questioned who belonged inside. Captain Randall Voss sat at the defense table wearing a plain prison uniform instead of the decorated police uniform he had once worn with pride. Beside him sat former Officer Dean Mercer, whose confidence had disappeared long before the trial began. The evidence left little room for argument. Hours of restored body camera footage, Sergeant Paul Kessler's recordings, false incident reports, the recovered audio from 23 years earlier, the testimony of Ruth Daniels, and the unmistakable pattern of abuse hidden beneath years of rewritten paperwork. One after another, victims stood before the court. A delivery driver who had spent 3 nights in jail after a fabricated arrest. A nursing student whose complaint had mysteriously vanished. A retired veteran forced to the ground during a traffic stop despite never resisting. Each story revealed the same pattern. Power without accountability. Judge Margaret Holloway looked toward the packed courtroom before reading the verdict. Captain Randall Voss is found guilty on all federal counts. The courtroom remained silent. Officer Dean Mercer is found guilty of civil rights violations, conspiracy to falsify official records, unlawful detention, and destruction of evidence. Neither man looked up. The sentence was more than prison. Both lost their law enforcement certifications permanently. Neither would ever wear a badge again. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Adrian Cole. One journalist asked the question everyone wanted answered. Commissioner Cole, after everything Captain Voss did to you, do you feel justice has finally been served? Adrian paused before answering. Justice isn't measured by how harshly someone falls. It's measured by how many innocent people will never suffer the same abuse again. Those words appeared on newspaper front pages across the state the next morning. The reforms began almost immediately. As Commissioner of the State Bureau of Public Safety, Adrian established an independent integrity division responsible for reviewing every officer-involved complaint statewide. No department would ever again investigate itself in complete secrecy. Every body camera recording would automatically upload to secure state servers beyond local control. Tampering with evidence became grounds for immediate suspension pending criminal review. Anonymous whistleblower protections expanded, encouraging honest officers to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Sergeant Paul Kessler became the first officer protected under the new policy. When asked why he finally chose to speak, his answer was simple. I stopped asking whether telling the truth would cost my career. I started asking what staying silent was costing everyone else. Lieutenant General Marcus Cole introduced a new joint leadership program between the National Guard and civilian law enforcement academies. The program focused on one principle repeated during every graduation ceremony. Authority exists to protect the vulnerable, not to intimidate them. Young recruits heard the story of the courthouse without learning the names of those involved until the very end. Marcus wanted them to understand the lesson before they admired the titles. Governor Elijah Cole signed new legislation on the very courthouse steps where he and his brothers had once stood in handcuffs. The law carried only 4 words: the Isaiah Cole Act. The legislation required independent evidence storage, mandatory external review of serious misconduct allegations, stronger whistleblower protections, and enhanced penalties for anyone who intentionally falsified official reports under color of law. As Elijah signed the bill, hundreds of citizens applauded. Standing quietly in the front row was Ruth Daniels. Elijah invited her onto the stage. You protected the truth when it would have been easier to walk away. Ruth smiled through tears. I was only keeping a promise. No, Elijah answered gently. You were protecting justice until justice was ready to protect itself. Later that afternoon, the 3 brothers returned to Riverside. No cameras followed them. No reporters waited. Only the quiet cemetery where Isaiah Cole rested beneath an old oak tree. Adrian knelt beside the headstone. In his hands were the 2 broken pieces of the brass memorial pin. A local craftsman had repaired them with a thin line of silver instead of hiding the crack. Marcus looked at it. You left the break visible. Adrian nodded. Some scars deserve to be remembered. He carefully fastened the restored pin onto his father's old brown coat before folding the coat neatly across the headstone. For several moments, none of the brothers spoke. The wind gently moved through the trees. Finally, Elijah broke the silence. Dad always said dignity couldn't be taken. Marcus smiled softly. He was right. Adrian looked toward the city skyline in the distance. We didn't win because one of us led the police, Marcus added. Or because one of us commanded soldiers. Elijah finished the thought. Or because one of us governed a state. He looked at the repaired brass pin. We won because, for one day, the system was finally forced to treat 3 ordinary black men the way every ordinary citizen should always be treated. The brothers stood together for one final moment before walking away from the cemetery. 3 different paths, 3 different responsibilities, one promise: to leave behind a justice system where no child would ever have to watch a father come home in handcuffs simply because someone in power believed dignity belonged only to certain people. True justice begins when we refuse to judge others by appearance and choose to stand for truth, even when it's difficult. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe, because every story we share is a reminder that integrity will always outlast injustice.